It all starts here. Infinite surfaces turn to it. Uncountable textures depend on it. Unselfish, humble, consistent. Inseparable from our condition. Our first morning companion, our last associate at close of play. Revenant. Creator. And what do we ask of it? On, off, rise, set. A boundless force, far from binary. Limited words talk of limitless potential. These expanses we occupy, these spaces we construct and anoint our homes are built and composed just to contain it. This intangible blueprint that runs through all things. We gather round it, communicate through it. So what stuff is this that warms us to the core? We have bottled the storm and let it rumble, conquered the lightning and cradled its heat in our hands. Awe has turned to control. The infinite possibilities of the world outside exist within our grasp. Your space, your creation, it starts here. Light starts here.
Shelley. Hopefully that got the, there we go. Hey Shelley, how you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Right, guys. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. This is the third in our series. Again, we're sort of truly humbled by, hello Sebastian. But we're absolutely humbled by the number of people who, again, have logged in from all four corners of the world to look at this. I mean, it's obviously one notable thing is my older brother isn't here at the moment. He has got a bout of post-viral fatigue syndrome, which happens as a result of getting into things a bit too quickly after Corona. So I love you, mate, and you'll be back soon, and wish you a speedy recovery. But to everyone out there, if you do know anyone that gets it, do make sure you rest up, because this thing is serious. That's why we're all indoors. But very, very perfect timing, I guess, as a result of us all being indoors, to talk about light and how powerful it is. And the whole reason that we set this thing up separate to Phos, we set up Light Tribe as an idea of it being completely separate, because ultimately we don't want to be tied to a brand to promote the power of light. This is something that we truly believe in. We think that light has an amazing ability to change the way that we experience our world, and it's such a massively powerful tool to improve our quality of life. And I actually started off in a completely different industry, the booze industry, and I was came home every weekend and saw my older brother who kept talking about light, and I was like, whatever. And I joined the company, and I'm completely obsessed with it now. And I was blessed enough to be introduced to Shelley via a mutual friend of ours, and she's such a fountain of wisdom. And between us, we've created this platform to try and draw a direct line between researcher and designer. We have such an amazing opportunity to change the way that we operate in this world, and improve the quality of life. And Phos's sidearm, the Light Tribe, is quite literally a tribe. It honors the roots of where we came from, and it's supposed to be a bit of a tip of the hat to the fact that we rely on the sun so much. And Shelley's been amazing in sort of educating us and guiding us through the sort of early stages. So Shelley, thank you so much again for joining us for the third one. So let's crack on. If we walk sort of through the general format of this. So the first webinar that we did was Light on Earth. So this sort of discussed light and its effect on Earth and on creatures, and how governed we are by it. And then we moved on to colour and optical illusions, and Shelley kind of blew our mind in the optical illusions part, particularly for me. We had some sort of crazy graphics and stuff, which you can catch up on our YouTube channel. We'll put the link at the end. But we sort of touched on how our eyes decipher colour, and how optical illusions happen as a result of our brain trying to understand and make sense of these electrical signals in the world around us. And this one delves into sort of color, surface, and texture, so more light and how light affects color and how that in turn affects us. And we're splitting this into two parts. The first part is just in this webinar, and our second one will be on the 28th of May, and that's more about the sort of behavioral psychology of spaces as a result of color. And there's an amazing sort of host of information on that. So really looking forward to it. Hope you guys sort of take away a thing or two. Another thing is at the end we will be sending sort of a mailer out with a recording of this, but also a link to a donation page for NHS workers who are doing massive amounts. So I think more and more as time goes on, we're being affected by it on a more personal level, particularly me and my brother. And if you enjoy what we're doing here, we'd love to sort of do our part in the grand scheme of things. And any donations would be pretty welcome. But let's crack on. So Shelley, one of the amazing things that you showed me was the fact that we've always been fascinated by sight and trying to understand it. And one of the early sort of theories of sight was this. And there's this sort of beautiful analogy you had of the fact that we thought that we used to quite literally reach out and touch objects. And for me, that was such a poignant and amazing way of explaining how much deeper vision is than just sight. It's an emotional touching. Light is almost a form of touch. I just sort of puts in perspective how powerful light is as a tool to really understand and quite literally touch the world around us. If we then go on to this one as well, you made the point that this is a beautiful image from the Hubble Space Telescope, and you were mentioning that none of these colors are actually factually red or orange, right?
Well, that's true. I suppose one of the things, particularly in this kind of on-screen world, most of the colors that we're experiencing on screen are entirely made up, and so we have a feeling that we can touch the universe, touch those galaxies, but every single color there is essentially a false color, and all the colors that you're seeing on your screen today they're false colors too. I've got a ring light here, so I can change this around to make myself look really blue or really yellow, and I'm going to put it to a middle one. But I guess the point of the conversation today is all about how powerful light is, and the conversation between light and surface and texture in our experience of the world around us. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how that affects our brains and our bodies and the way we act as well. So the point of that slide is to say that all the colors you're seeing, all the colors of us that you're seeing, all the things that you're experiencing on your screens are entirely made up. They're a set of interfaces and decisions that your software is making. So it's actually an analogy for the way that the brain is working, because the colors that you feel or that you see are entirely generated in the mind's eye, essentially. So
what I loved about that as well is the fact that the Hubble Space Telescope is out in the universe trying to almost making up these colors that it thinks it sees, and then all of us suddenly seeing them on screens have 1,000,001 interpretations of those colors that the Hubble Space Telescope has made up. So color is such a variable thing, but it still strikes such an emotion. It's it was just sort of quite an amazing fact that you told us. And another really nice point of we mentioned it in the last webinar, but Karen Haller has a really nice expression of saying that the world that we see, the colors in the world around us that we see, are actually the wavelengths of light that are rejected. So this vibrant world is actually sort of one full of rejected wavelengths, which I thought was quite a beautiful way of explaining things.
So essentially what's happening when you see something that's green, in fact, you can say that a green leaf is anything but green. So what it's doing is taking all the wavelengths that are falling on it and absorbing everything except the green. And that's a big area. We can talk about that some more. But essentially it's absorbing almost all of the wavelengths except for the green. And the green is a set of packet of wavelengths that reach the eye, and that's what you perceive.
Okay. So would you like to explain a little bit about this? And it's a sort of very dynamic, changing light throughout the day.
Yeah. So what we realized, and actually relatively recently, we've realized that there are two different pathways which are dealing with color. The first is noticing shifts in the wavelengths of color in the world. So as you can see from this image, there are a very different set of, the light is a very different color, color temperature when it's in the morning and midday through to evening, and then that affects the colors that we see. So you can see that you don't believe that the sea is a different color at different moments in that picture, but our brains are so used to kind of adjusting for the lighting conditions that led to things like the blue, the gold dress, and all those other illusions. But the reason to put this slide in here is to say that our experience of color and surface and texture is entirely dependent on the wavelengths that are available, and that our primitive brains respond. There's a set of responses which respond to that shift between the blue and the yellow. And when we find ourselves with a kind of a bright blue light, it affects our physiology. We tend to get more alert and more awake. And when we get into a warm glow light, then we tend to shift into kind of restful states. So it's just the kind of the legacy of our early world growing up in the open air is still very much hardwired into our response to color.
Okay. And this is sort of a nice graphic, I guess, of the makeup of the light, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, Newton discovered that what he thought of as white light actually is made up of different parts of the spectrum. So you saw the picture earlier of the leaf and the wavelengths falling on it and then bouncing off. Obviously, there'll be different wavelengths falling on that leaf. At noon, you can see there's a full spectrum there compared to the evening and then in the night. And so our experience of those colors is very different at those different moments in time.
So for the designers, I guess that does sort of put in perspective the need, from an evolutionary standpoint, we've got this way that you describe it as a fossil in our DNA, sort of millions of years of evolution have stamped this governance by the sun into us. And, the changing light that's emitted, as you can see in this graphic, sort of suggests that in our spaces, from a health and well-being point of view, we kind of have a bit of a responsibility and an opportunity to give that dynamic lighting a chance to sort of improve our daily lives as well.
Absolutely.
So also we were sort of talking a little bit earlier about light and sort of how it interacts in terms of color, but surfaces and textures respond in different ways as well, right?
Yeah, so your experience of color, and if you want, you can actually flip on to the next slide. If you could, you can see from this, these are the same RAL colors on this wall, and the shiny, your experience of the color on the mottled shiny one is obviously very different to the experience of color on the matte one. And if we just flip back to the previous slide, you can see that there are actually, as a designer or as a materials designer or as somebody who's choosing textures and colors for your space, you can just think about 4 different types of surface and how they're going to affect your experience of color and light. So if you're looking at something perfectly shiny, that's something that's the level of reflection. Something that absorbs all the light, that's absorption. And surfaces which are rough scatter the light. And there are also obviously transparent surfaces which transmit the light. So some light, it bends it slightly as it travels through, and then it sets off again from the other side. So when you're looking at color, and in fact the pathways, we'll talk about that in a second, but the pathways that interpret color, they are the same pathways that interpret texture. So those our experience of color is intimately linked to our experience of surface texture. And we'll see why in a second.
It does sort of make sense then when, the idea of the early theories of sight, how you literally reach out and touch an object, light is a form of touch. You really do, light is an amazing ability to get you understanding more about the objects. When you do look at this, you can see that it's a bit more rough and it's all, the photons reacting with the space around us. And you quite literally, you sense the object, which I think is amazing.
Absolutely.
So there's an amazing quote by Semir Zeki, who's a neurobiologist, and she says that we see in order to be able to acquire knowledge about this world. So I think it's a really nice way of explaining sort of how important sight is, but why is it so important not just to us, but to animals as well?
Well, what's remarkable is that certainly dichromatic and then 3-color and even 4-color vision evolved and the very, very earliest creatures as they were crawling out of the ocean. And it seems as though the ability not only to tell brightness, but also different colors is vital to, well, it's, as we know, it's vital to mating, it's vital to feeding, it's vital to predation. So perhaps you could pop onto the next slide and just see some examples of how that works.
Mm.
So, well, these are all examples of animals and plants which use color in very obvious and powerful ways to either attract or repel or direct their mates and their predators and foraging. So, for example, there's been a kind of an intimate relationship between the evolution of colors in plants and colors in foraging insects, for example. So the visual systems of bees recognize the UV light, the UV colors in plants in a way so that they evolve together. So all of the colors that we see are evolved for a particular, the ability to see evolved for a particular purpose. And it's really amazing how even the most primitive creatures in evolutionary terms invested a lot of energy in being able to see colors because it was so vital to their survival.
Hmm. And also, I guess, for sort of understanding the world around us, foraging and
yeah. So I mean, even in today's kind of online shopping world, we're so good at spotting those differences in texture and color. So if you sit here, I mean, particularly with online shopping right now, you would know what those apples would feel like and taste like. And so even through the way that you present images as photographs, you really need to represent or find ways of showing those particular surface properties and those chromatic qualities of the objects that you're showing. So the colored light that you use and the type of light is really going to help somebody to kind of be able to taste and feel and touch the things that you're showing.
Okay.
So perhaps you could move on to the next
one. A bit more of a worrying example here, I guess, but
yeah. So again, we use, if I was to show you those in black and white, you wouldn't get your physical response wouldn't be quite so strong as it is with this with the color that you see.
So I loved it when we were sort of putting this presentation together. The really interesting thing for me was the idea that light reacts with objects in different ways, and our brain then assesses the contrast and between two different colors, as well as the reflection and all these different things. And essentially, light reacting with an object and bouncing off. There's so much processing in our brains that allows us to understand the object a little bit more.
Yeah, so you can almost you know what it would feel like to touch that puppy, to touch that lab, or to touch that woolly dog. So even though they're the same color, but the point of this slide is really to say that surface and texture are an integral part of our experience of color. And as we'll see in a moment, the brain processes those through the same pathways.
Okay. So what is actually happening here? I mean, it's sort of obviously a magical thing. But how do we make sense of it all?
Well, I think, as I mentioned just now, if you'd like to flop onto the next slide, we have the structure, we have the hardware of perception. So the light is coming in through the cornea and in through the vitreous and aqueous humor in the eye. And as we get older, our corneas get cloudy, the lenses get cloudy, these different fluids in the eye get cloudy. So the light that filters through gets changed. So people who are older or have different visual conditions, they'll see colors slightly differently because they're the same wavelengths. Some of the wavelengths of light are being blocked on their way in. But then it hits the retina, and there are different types of rods and cones in the back of the eye, and they interpret color in different ways, and you can see that in that diagram. But so we have these two different pathways. One of them is these ganglion cells which interpret the blue yellow spectrum, and then we have these other image forming rods and cones which interpret these three different types of color, which then we combine in our brain. If you like to flip onto the next slide.
Yeah.
So assembled in some what are called blobs in the visual cortex, which is right at the back under your ponytail if you've got one, and then it's processed through a series of stages. So it gets essentially clumped up, and shape and texture and color travel along similar but sort of separate pathways, and then they kind of join a bit like letters in the post, sort of getting grouped until they reach a point where we can identify an object and its properties and whether it's edible and all those other sorts of things. So it's really interesting that it's traveling down that particular pathway alongside it's a separate pathway to faces, for example. So our color processing, it also turns out that it has a direct link to our to the autonomic nervous system, and so particular wavelengths of color stimulate the autonomic nervous system in ways that are remarkable. So red is an arousing. It creates an electromagnetic field which is higher energy. The blue activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the relaxation mode, and the green flips between the two. So not only do we use our color vision to form our ideas about objects in the world and about what time of day it is, but also to regulate our physiological state.
So I find that, I mean, it's amazing. The fact that light can react with an object and make us feel the very core of our being in certain ways. The fact that blue can make us feel calm or red arouses. So I just find it absolutely amazing. When we look at it from a design perspective, the opportunity to really think about whether in a sitting room you'd like to relax, whether maybe you use a certain shade of blue to really calm yourself down, or, there really is a massive scope of using color to improve the way that we exist. So I find really, really interesting. So synesthesia, there's one of my really, really good friends is synesthetic, and I spoke to him about this yesterday. And so there are a number of artists and musicians who claim to be synesthetic, including Pharrell Williams and Stevie Wonder, who claims he can hear color. So for me, synesthesia is an amazing thing that I think represents how closely linked the senses are. This idea, we go right back to the beginning where we talk about how light can help us, almost as a form of touch. The fact that these emotions are so closely weaved together really does show how important light is in making us feel and connect with all kinds of aspects of our senses.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, so we talk about these are sort of pre-language forms of processing and experience, but what's interesting is that we also can see that when we start to think about color and language and classification, the more words we have for color, the more colors we're able to see. So it turns out there are 5 universal words for color, and most of us have some level of synesthesia in the sense that we, if we see orange, we might think sharp, and that we might imagine the taste of an orange. So this is an ancient, very well-known experiment where if you ask somebody to say what word that blob one on the left would be, they'd probably say booba. They choose them between booba and kiki, and the spiky one, they'd probably call it kiki. And if you ask them to assign colors, they're going to assign particular colors as well. In fact, they probably wouldn't assign green. They're more likely to assign a hot color like red. So it's really interesting how different cultures and different people have different words for color. But also, if you use more kind of complicated words like cappuccino for brown for your paint, people are going to perceive that cappuccino color as something that is higher value and possibly higher status, and also possibly more complicated. So if you think about, it's interesting to think about the colors, the words that you have for color, and it turns out that also women tend to have a bigger vocabulary for color than men. And so I think we all get to think about how we experience color and how we can possibly simply use language to change our ability to perceive and understand and celebrate color in our lives.
There's so referred to, it'll be in the reading list as well, but a woman called Karen Haller, who did some research on color psychology, and she spoke to a chap called Dimitri Smilonas. He's a color scientist at UCL, and he said that he believes that different countries should have different numbers of light from a prism, from a spectrum. So Isaac Newton put it into 7. He reckons there should be 11. And he also said that women were far better at naming colors, which meant that they had a greater sort of experience of color within their environments. I think we can all do with a little bit more promotion of color and engagement with it. I mean, hopefully, you know, the fact that we know how important color is from a scientific perspective, you know, we can start trying to fight a bit more with sort of knowledge and harnessing the power of color. Yeah,
I mean that also, I suppose, if you are, my mum very generously offered to make me a cup of coffee, and it was really hard to explain the perfect color that I want. We knew it when we saw it, but
every British person has their favorite color.
So it's just really interesting. And I guess this slide is just to say that not only if we have color, if we just talk about sort of in abstract, the cup of coffee, the colored light that you see it in makes a big difference to your experience of that coffee. It changes your ability to taste it. It changes your ability to remember it. It changes everything you experience about that piece of the coffee or that salad or whatever. So it's really remarkable time right now where new lighting technologies, particularly new forms of chips and new forms of control, are allowing us to bring the range of colors back into our lives, because the old-fashioned light bulbs, as you see, they're very choppy. So if your light source doesn't have green in it, then your salad is going to look very brown. So we all have a responsibility and the pleasure right now of sort of upping our game in terms of the kinds of colors that we bring into our lives simply by changing the light source.
So another thing, I mean, yeah, it's a really valid point. You know, the importance of the quality of the light is really important in terms of how the light will react to the space. And you do examples of how if you have an odd type of light source reacting with the coffee, it might throw off the color, which can, you know, make you think that maybe it looks like the rotten apples, or, you know, there's a lot of deep stuff at work. So the idea of having a very good quality light bulb or LED is very important. And then also flicker as well, you know, this idea of oscillatory sickness and LEDs flickering away and sort of causing you to feel uneasy. You know, the quality of the light is something that is, you know, a lot of, you know, we're trying to champion the use of lighting designers here, because, you know, we understand the importance of lighting design, as do they, and, you know, the importance of light within our life is so apparent, but the quality of the light, the quality of the control systems, and, you know, all the little things which really make a difference to the way the space is experienced is really key. And sort of flickering and the quality of light is something which, yeah, obviously we spoke with you about, but something that as an industry, I think we're getting more and more passionate about, which is great.
And we're also going to talk a lot more about how light experience sort of affects behavior in the psychology of light and the symbology of light in our next talk in May.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a beautiful shot. This is, I sort of mentioned it in the last webinar as well, but the Surface Design Show, seems like a very long time ago. Rebecca Weir was talking about biophilic design. She's a great lighting designer from Light IQ, and she was talking about, you know, indirect biophilic design, which is when you can bring colors of nature into a space, so blues and greens, and direct biophilic design, so literally bringing in slate and wood and trees and, you know, that kind of stuff. And there is an amazing ability of light to adapt and improve the way that light reacts with surfaces and, you know, washes out color, can really, you know, engage us with the space and the nature within that space. So if we also look at this, so shadows in architecture, there's an amazing book by a guy called Tamazaki, and it's called In Praise of Shadows. And he mentions that, you know, in Japan in the 1920s, the world was sort of, you know, a much simpler place. There was, you know, candle light that washed out sort of, you know, nice rice paper walls, and it felt warm and cozy. And, you know, cut 50 years later, and it was polished concrete, bright blue lights, and it felt a bit cold. And this book, In Praise of Shadows, was sort of a passionate request for the world to honor shadows and respect how important they are. And, you know, this image of St. Paul's is, you know, the dome is lit from three sides, which allows the shadows to really wash out the texture. And, you know, by having the shadows and the darkness, we can kind of touch it. You know, we get a greater understanding of the texture of the material. And, you know, you've been sort of pretty amazing at sort of explaining how important that is to us as well. And then, yeah, so we're going to talk about this a little bit more on the 28th of May, which is our next webinar. This is about sort of behavioral psychology, but colors can make a massive difference to a space, can't they, Shelley?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, as you can see, so I think we all, now we are living in our homes more. It's time to be more active and more conscious about how the arrangement of colours and textures and lighting sources in our spaces affect the way we live and breathe, and our ability to be healthy and happy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then this is an amazing installation by Liz West. It's, you know, she's a light artist, and on our website, if you do have a moment, we've got a page called Conversations with Light, and we've interviewed a number of people about, you know, the light and how important they are, how important lighting is to them, and color in particular. And we've been completely passionate about sort of how important light is. We've learned a lot with yourself, Shelley, about what light can do to us and what color can do to us. And I think it's an amazing moment for us all, given the fact that we're in isolation, to really rethink the way that we design our spaces. And the idea of this light tribe is to really get everyone involved with the tribe. You know, we've had an amazing amount of engagement from a number of people who have watched these webinars, and thank you so much for the sort of enthusiasm and getting in touch and asking us whether they can be part of it, and, you know, sharing research that they've done and stuff. And, you know, we really are trying to champion the art of light design, the art of good quality light. And, you know, we're trying to draw a direct link between researcher and designer, so we can change the world for the better together. So hopefully you'll tune in to a couple more of these with Dr. Shelley to try and make the world a bit of a better place. So yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for sticking it out until now. It's, you know, it's a pleasure as ever, Shelley, to have you. And every single time we do this, even after we've done our research, when we're actually in on the day doing it live, I still learn stuff. I mean, your knowledge is unbelievable. So thank you so much. We've got sort of 5 key takeaway points which Shelley and myself and James said that, you know, we thought were really key. And the first one is, you know, vision is a form of touch. You know, with synesthesia showing how intertwined our senses are, you know, light quite literally gives us an emotional touching ability, and it's amazing what light can do for that. And second one is that colors are created in the mind from light, surface, and texture. And, you know, that can really affect our autonomic nervous system and make us feel in amazing ways. So colors are, you know, generated within the mind and are amazing bits of information. And yeah, the third one, you know, colors generate powerful physiological responses. And then the fourth one, which is very poignant, you know, in this lockdown world, lighting plays a vital part in our experience of color and ultimately our health and well-being. So, you know, really, really, really what we're trying to do here is to get people to understand how amazing light is. And I know a lot of the people, and hopefully everyone in this webinar knows that, but, you know, but we're trying to change the world using light because it does have the power to do that. And new technology has created an opportunity and responsibility to use light and color to improve our daily lives. So, you know, we are at a very interesting point in the world where we have the technology to make our lives and our spaces even more incredible. So there's a reading list here. I'll leave it up briefly. There's a couple of people who have said, you know, which books were which, and we will email this out as well, just so you have, you know, an easy go-to list, so you can go and get stuff. And to bring it back again, we do have a Just Giving page for the NHS. It's absolutely voluntary. We'll send a donate page along with the mailer that will follow later today. But you know, it would really mean a lot to them and to us. And, you know, as I say, we're just trying to do our part. And yeah, so at the top here, we also have Shelley's page, Age of Light Innovations, which I really suggest you go and check out. And then a couple of our sort of social media platforms, which we've got lots of sort of interesting, relevant light tribe related stuff going on. And, you know, think of it as a nice source of material, hopefully for designers and researchers to link up. So Shelley, again, thank you from the bottom of my heart again for putting up with us and helping us put this together. And to everyone that's, you know, tuned in for us, thank you so much. Any questions you do have, please email lighttribe@phos.co.uk. We will get back to you. And please do join our tribe. You know, this is one team, one dream kind of thing. So we'd love to have you aboard again. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now.